President.
Recognize the senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me talk for a moment about my path towards science and what it's meant. A lot of people know my mother was widowed twice before she turned 40. My father died when I was 8. I was the youngest kid. So I had really thick glasses and acne, and I was, let's just say, marginalized when I was in 3rd and 4th grade, and the butt of many jokes. I was bullied on a regular basis. But it's funny, as I went through school, and I did have this natural curiosity right from the word. I mean, I love sports, but didn't keep me from doing schoolwork around discovery. And there's a whole peripheral culture in most schools, both the high schools and the middle schools I went to, where the kids that are the nerds, I guess I would call myself a nerd back then, kind of hung out together, and they were also the people that were into the arts or into music, into tech. And it's really only in the last 25 years that peripheral part of most colleges and universities became the foundation of, or I should say the fulcrum of our economic growth. And that's the beginning of the age of technology back in the 1990s. We're here today because before the holidays, the Trump administration announced that they were going to dismantle the National Center for Atmospheric Research based in Boulder, as my colleague, Senator Bennett, so elegantly described. And I'm going to go through some of that. I'm going to reiterate some of what he said just because I think it's that important that we hear it more than once. In our office, my office, Senator Bennett's office, we are determined to do everything we can to stand up to this administration and their actions that harm Coloradans and I think in many ways harm the country. And our demand is simple: put language into the appropriations bills that guarantees full funding for NCAR. And I understand the senator from Maine's objection to, in history, certainly in recent history, there has been no precedent for this, but in recent history there's been no precedent for a president to go back and tell the National Science Foundation, you have to rescind this money from that specific Office of Research. And NCAR isn't just a research center. As Senator Bennett described, it's a national resource. Obviously, this administration has a different view. When Russell Vought took to social media to announce his plan, he called NCAR one of the largest sources of climate alarmism in the country. Now, I'm not sure that Mr. Vought knows exactly what NCAR does. If he did, I think he wouldn't understand the irony in that tweet. NCAR quite literally powers our country's alarm system around weather. It's our watchdog for extreme storms and fires, hurricanes, tornadoes, the things that cause floods. Every single American, whether they're aware of it or not, relies on NCAR data. Most of them, and this administration's included, aren't really aware of it. So here are a few more reasons why all of us should want NCAR to stick around. If you're an American who likes to know whether a tornado's headed your way, if you're one of the people who appreciates an early text alert before you get an oncoming winter storm, and let me say we've had far too few of those this year, if you prefer to be on high ground instead of stuck in your car during a flash flood, or if you'd like to look at maps to show you where and when extreme weather is going to hit, then you need NCAR. If you like any of those things, you are directly benefiting from the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And here's where the administration gets it really wrong. If we're going to call anything alarming, it's our weather patterns. Wildfires, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, severe weather in all forms, winter storms, they're all becoming more intense and less predictable. I, along with many scientists, refer to it as climate change. Back when I was in graduate school, we called it the greenhouse effect. But to call it a hoax or just extreme weather doesn't change what's happening right outside your front door. We've had less snowfall in Colorado this winter than in any year in recorded history. Now, if you're going to get rid of NCAR, you're going to take away that opportunity to use history and the facts from recorded history. It's NCAR's job to use science to make extreme weather at least somewhat predictable and to make sure that we can save American lives and property. The National Center for Atmospheric Research built the backbone of American weather forecasting models that are now used all around the world. Their weather prediction system is used by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's used by the National Weather Service, the Department of Defense, emergency managers in pretty much every state, and all the universities worldwide to predict hurricanes, blizzards, floods, wildfire behavior. When we track hurricanes today, our 3 to 5 day forecast is as accurate as the 1 day forecast was back in the 1990s. That's from research, because NCAR research helped improve global radar systems. Take Hurricane Sandy in 2012. High-resolution models help forecasters predict the hurricane's unusual path a whole week before landfall. That extra time meant emergency crews could get a head start, could evacuate entire communities, and prepare for that storm's landfall. It wouldn't have been possible even a decade before. Back home in Colorado, NCAR's fire weather research and modeling tools are critical for wildfire preparedness. NCAR's research helps us understand how extreme weathers and extreme winds and local weather combined to fuel the 2021 Marshall Fire, the single most destructive fire in Colorado history. Almost 1,100 homes were destroyed. We vowed that would never happen again, but we can't make good on that promise without NCAR. Its research is actively improving wildfire prediction, not just in Colorado, but across the country. NCAR is our safety net, and dismantling it to combat so-called climate alarmism is the policy equivalent of sticking your fingers in your ears and yelling la 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 to drown out the tornado that's rearranging your living room. Without NCAR, our country isn't safer. We're just more unprepared. NCAR also conducts the research on space weather. This allows us to know what threats there are for our satellites, especially our GPS satellites, which are crucial for the health of our infrastructure, not to mention our weather forecasting. And it's not just weather. It's also our national security. Without NCAR, our military defense systems could take a huge hit. NCAR has been central to President Trump's military adventure. On January 3rd, when the U.S. military launched 150 aircraft across the Western Hemisphere to capture Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, they knew in advance that visibility would be clear. Members of Delta Force had been training for weeks under the exact weather conditions that they would be operating in. Conditions had to be perfect because there was a zero margin for error. How did they know that the conditions would be clear on January 3rd? The National Center for Atmospheric Research. NCAR's scientists developed the advanced weather prediction system that the Pentagon relies on, known as the Global Climatology Analysis Tool, or GCAT. To put it simply, however you feel about the president's mission, a small failure, even the smallest failure, would have meant putting American lives at risk. NCAR's technology helps make our military the strongest in the world. It is a part of that strength. The irony here is that this administration is too focused on retribution, in this case to our state of Colorado and our governor, to actually understand the consequences of really what's going to be the consequence of what they're doing. U.S. military success and our country's ability to keep Americans safe from natural disaster hinges on NCAR. This administration might as well declare war on smoke detectors in our homes or carbon monoxide alarms, because those critical detection systems function in much the same way that NCAR's research does. This administration's war on our premier weather research center isn't a standalone attack. And very sadly, it's part of a broader campaign to spite our state. The president and his administration have set their sights on Colorado to settle what they perceive as a political score. He wants Colorado to release one of his most fervent supporters, Tina Peters, the former clerk and recorder of Mesa County. Ms. Peters is currently in prison after she was convicted on state charges of tampering with Colorado's election equipment in 2020. This wasn't just a case of election denialism or spreading conspiracy theories. Ms. Peters is in prison because she tampered with the election equipment she took an oath to protect. She was tried and prosecuted by a Republican district attorney and convicted by her peers, majority Republican jury in Mesa County. Now the president is pressuring our governor to release her, and in the process, hurting Coloradans to do it. We have one strong message in that Colorado is not going to give in to a bully or bow to a king. We believe in the rule of law, and we're going to fight to protect the traditional notion of American democracy. Even worse, most of Coloradans, most of the Coloradans who these attacks harm have no clue who Tina Peters actually is. Many of the people most severely subject to the consequence of these decisions are Republicans. And NCAR is just one of the recent targets. As part of his campaign against Colorado, President Trump also denied emergency disaster relief to help families rebuild after devastating wildfires and floods. He canceled millions of dollars for clean energy. He slashed hundreds of millions of dollars in child care assistance for families and denied 50,000 rural Coloradans clean drinking water. Let me say it again. The President of the United States denied emergency funding for American citizens to help them rebuild their lives after wildfires and flooding, for many of them, destroyed the lives they knew this past summer. It's not a game. These are people's lives. These are our constituents' lives. We can start with the President's second attack on FEMA funding. In August, the Elk and Lee fires tore across the western slope of Colorado, burning more than 152,000 acres of land. Farmers and ranchers lost thousands of acres they were depending on for grazing and for farming. The fires also damaged electrical infrastructure that businesses and families depend on for not just to do their business, but to live on at home, that they depend on for energy. Just weeks later, floods ripped through more communities in western Colorado, including La Plata, Archuleta, and Mineral counties. Families lost homes. Businesses lost everything. The floods even destroyed drinking water and wastewater infrastructure, risking people's safety. Residents have been left to pick up the broken pieces of their lives and try to rebuild. Colorado estimates that the fires caused $27 million worth of damage, and the flooding caused at least $13 million more. Unfortunately, Colorado is no stranger to major disasters, and the struggle to rebuild the lives hurt in the aftermath. It's sadly a part of our way of life. We band together, we lift each other up, and we rebuild back better than it was before. We rebuild stronger. I'll always remember the horrible wildfires and floods that our state experienced when I was governor. I remember visiting Lyons after the floods of 2013, the worst floods in the history of our state, and flying over that area in a helicopter and seeing people marooned on the roofs of their houses or their businesses, some of them there for a couple of days, waiting to get help. I saw and heard how neighbors and small business owners reached out and helped each other, helped get each other through the worst hard times of their lives. They cleaned their stores out, their shops. They rebuilt their homes. It was a Herculean effort. And our federal government stepped up with the emergency FEMA helping that could make it possible. They don't pay for everything. They pay for a very small amount, but it's a crucial piece of the recovery. That's why President Trump's decision to reject Colorado's disaster requests without any objective reason and to withhold resources that would help our communities recover, it's why it's so infuriating, not just to me and Senator Bennett, but to so many people across our state and across the country. I mean, why in God's name would the federal government turn its back on its own citizens who'd gone through, in many cases, the worst hard time of their lives? Why should Coloradans not get the same support to rebuild their lives that the Trump administration had already delivered to the people of Alaska or North Dakota following the natural disasters in their communities? Because people in Colorado opt to vote by mail, like many red states, and President Trump hates vote by mail? I'm not sure that's true. That's certainly not how America should work. The president's third target was our booming energy economy. And this October, the administration canceled $7.5 billion in clean energy grants in blue states. Colorado's renewable energy industry lost $550 million in funding that had already passed into law, had already been appropriated. Their rationale? They said the Democrats had a quote-unquote green new scam. And I'd really like to ask the president, is making energy more efficient a scam? And were all those grants, the majority of which went to red states, states that had a Republican governor and a Republican General Assembly, were they part of the scam? What about lowering energy prices so families can heat their homes this winter without sacrificing the ability to afford their kids' health insurance? Is that a scam? What happened to the Republican so-called energy emergency? Canceling billions of dollars of energy projects that are ready to go, or very close to ready to go, or in some cases almost complete, while disrupting much-needed updates to our energy grid. This is going to increase prices. This is going to hurt American families. It's lunacy. It makes no sense. Now, many millions of people voted for this president because they were struggling to afford their lives. And they heard that promise to lower prices. But you don't lower energy prices by punishing communities and canceling energy projects that are almost complete. That wastes the money that's already been spent. The fourth step on this revenge list, this revenge tour against Colorado, was a direct hit to our kids and to our families. At the beginning of this month, the administration tried to freeze $10 billion of federal funding for child care for Colorado and 4 other states. Again, blue states. Let me say this again. While prices are already increasing across the board, the President of the United States is cutting child care services and other resources for the most vulnerable families. Child care. No matter how you cut it, going after child care services for American families and for Colorado families is just plain cruel. Even worse, these services are for families that need it the most. More than 1.4 million children around the country depend on those programs. In Colorado, these programs help more than 27,000 children get child care so their parents can work. The administration has tried to claim that this is about rooting out fraud and waste, but there's no record in Colorado of fraud to justify their actions. We've got safeguards in place to prevent fraud at that scale and to ensure that federal funds actually go towards the care of children. Parents have enough to worry about. Now they have to figure out how to keep their jobs, deal with raising costs, and care for their children. The result? Families are going to lose the support that helps them keep financial stability. Now, thankfully, a federal judge has temporarily blocked the administration's attack on child care, but that has not stopped this president in the past, and we're not going to stop pushing back. And that brings us to the president's other target, clean drinking water for rural Coloradans. In certain parts of our state, we have high levels of radioactive minerals, heavy metals, and in some cases this is from waste, some cases this is natural, but it makes the drinking water unsafe. With one stroke of a pen, President Trump used the first veto of his second term to stand in the way of the Arkansas Valley Conduit, a 130-mile water project, an infrastructure project that would bring clean drinking water to 50,000 Americans in southeast Colorado. Now, this is the first time a bill has gone through both the House and the Senate on a unanimous basis. It passed the Senate unanimously, it passed the House unanimously, but for the first time since President Johnson, a president vetoed a bill that was passed by both houses unanimously. For the first time since President Johnson, I'm not talking about Lyndon Johnson. I'm going back to the Civil War, Andrew Johnson. That's the last time this happened. It's a decision that really does defy logic, but it fits a troubling pattern. While the parts of this administration are spending time on personal grievances, political beefs, the basic needs of American families are being treated as afterthoughts, as in many cases the prices soar. The Arkansas Valley Conduit has been in the works for 60 years, almost 65 years, after President John Kennedy came to Pueblo, Colorado in 1962 and gave a rousing speech and promised that the federal government would see it through. For 6 decades, Colorado leaders from both parties have fought to keep that promise. We're now in the final stages of the project. The Arkansas Valley Conduit is a remaining piece. We secured more than $500 million for the project from our historic bipartisan infrastructure law, and we broke ground on the conduit, the remaining portions of the conduit, in 2023. We worked with Republican Representative Lauren Boebert to introduce the Finish the Arkansas Valley Conduit Act to keep construction on track and to lower costs. This bipartisan bill passed the Senate unanimously. This bipartisan bill passed the House unanimously, both last year. That means every single senator and every single House member was good with it. But the president vetoed it. Now, I'm not sure why anyone would veto a unanimous bipartisan rural water project, unless they had a pretty serious beef, especially when our bill and the project would actually help the president keep his campaign promises. The completion of the Arkansas Valley Conduit would mean water for our rural schools in communities like Lamar, which are teaching the next generation. It would mean water for our local hospitals in towns like La Junta, which keep Coloradans healthy. Trump has left these communities out to dry, communities who have been waiting for clean drinking water for over 60 years, and communities who overwhelmingly voted for him. If you go look at these counties, they are a large proportion voted for President Trump in 2024. Now, when a president puts a political grievance against the governor of a state, against the working people that did their very best to elect him, against the schools and hospitals and ranchers that supported him, he isn't shaking up Washington. He's undermining the very people he swore to serve. And it's working people and rural communities who are paying the price. If members of either party wanted to actually deliver for their constituents, then the path forward would have been clear. Congress could have stood up to this intimidation, honored the promise that 60 years ago came from Washington, and overridden this veto. But last week, the House refused to do so. It was Washington at its worst. Now, rural Colorado is going to pay the price. Southeast Colorado was the target this month, but it'll be your community tomorrow. And I wish the president could spend some time in Southeast Colorado. Colorado, if you go back and look at the book, The Worst Hard Times, talking about the Great Depression and the dust storms, north the far northwest part of Oklahoma and the far southeast part of Colorado were the hardest hit. And that durability and willingness to withstand the worst hardships and keep on keeping on is what really sets southeast Colorado apart. But they were still the target this month, but it could be any community across the country tomorrow. President Trump's cuts aren't limited to Colorado or blue states. He's seemingly made it a goal to hinder America's leadership in science and innovation. He's fired literally thousands of scientists from our leading government agencies, like the National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden, NREL, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, in Boulder. And in the face of natural disasters, he's even shuttered NOAA facilities. That's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. He shuttered their facilities and fired scientists there, weakening not just Colorado, but the entire nation's ability to respond to wildfires or to track the West's worsening drought. The Trump administration also slashed funding for the National Institutes of Health, which is having a devastating impact on medical research projects in every state of this country. They've left veterans battling PTSD who are beginning to find relief in clinical trials. They've stripped resources for critical research to improve the lives of people with Down syndrome. They've cut support groups for our LGBT community struggling with mental health issues. We can't be surprised that the president doesn't place a high priority in science and research. He has never shown a great respect or support for it. And back when I graduated in 1979 with my master's in Earth and Environmental Sciences, we called it geology back in those days, I published peer-reviewed papers, and from that process and that experience, I've got a reverence for the scientific method. It's not always right. Science doesn't always get it right. I'm not saying there haven't been glaring mistakes in the history of science. But science always points us in the right direction and helps us determine when and where those mistakes are and how to rectify them. I think it's, Mark Kelly told me when I first got here, even though he was an engineer, I told him he was a scientist as well. He said, no, you're the only one in here who's actually done peer-reviewed, done experiments and then published peer-reviewed papers. As I said, science can sometimes surprise us. It's always evolving. It's always trying to figure out what's next, what the next frontier is, and it's why the field relies on constant evaluation and research to make new discoveries or deepen our understanding of some of the most complex problems facing the world. I also know that leading with science helps us get the most accurate information we can. Not always perfect, but the most accurate information we can get. So it really is frightening when the administration has shown a bias towards elevating people who peddle disinformation, and they sow doubt into every level of settled science. Cuts to science funding are going to cause long-term and profound damage to our standing in the world in terms of innovation. How can we expect to beat China in the fight, the race, to succeed at AI, or to find a cure for cancer, or remain the world's strongest economy if we're not investing in science? Science has been the foundation of every aspect of our economy. If our scientists are fleeing to other countries, and we're seeing this now on an increasing rate, if our scientists are fleeing to other countries that recognize economic and national security value of research, of scientific research, what's next? Not only are our scientists leaving to work in other countries, our students are choosing different careers because they don't see a safe, reliable future in science. With the administration's cuts to research funding, some of those folks finishing their PhD research are now stopped. They won't get that degree that in some cases they've spent 3 or 4 or 5 years working on. We can't train the next generation of scientists, engineers, and innovators without that upward flow. President Trump's Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is an example of someone who in many cases seems willing to overlook facts and overlook settled science. One of his most anti-scientific claims is that autism is caused by childhood vaccines. This is a claim that's been spread within communities for decades, all based on one single paper published way back in 1988. That paper has been retracted for years. There have been hundreds of studies investigating the link between autism and the measles vaccine ever since. They have found let me reiterate, they have found zero connection between vaccines and the cause of autism. It's settled science. Vaccines are not only extremely safe, but extremely effective. Every year they save millions of lives around the globe. We've effectively eliminated some of the worst diseases like polio, and we're already making considerable progress towards a vaccine for some of the other really debilitating diseases like HIV and AIDS. In the last 100 years, our country's life expectancy increased by 30 years. 25 of those 30 years are attributed to public health intervention, including clean drinking water and widespread vaccine adoption. So 25 of those 30 years of our improved life expectancy came from those investments in science. And we should recognize and accept that vaccines have had a huge impact on all of our abilities to lead healthy lives, to get out of childhood spared from diseases that in previous generations would have killed us. Some of the damage from the disinformation about vaccines is almost impossible to undo. Why do some accept the results of one debunked paper rather than the conclusions of hundreds of studies since that have been conducted in careful, measured processes? I mean, they've even tried to link Tylenol to autism with, again, no conclusive proof. People who peddle vaccine skepticism are preying upon parents' very rational fears to, these skeptics are trying to advance their own conspiracy theories. Parents are trying their hardest to keep their kids safe and healthy, and I think it's irresponsible for people to plague them with misinformation and what's not real science, when the science has been settled for decades. The measles vaccine is safe, and it doesn't cause autism. We can't let ourselves backslide in the number of children getting vaccinated, but that is what's happening. President Trump and RFK are moving full speed ahead, putting the health of our children and communities at risk, and implementing public health changes based on conspiracy theories and not science. Measles cases are now higher than they were in 1991. With over 2,000 confirmed cases nationwide, we've literally slid backwards in progress in eradicating measles. The U.S. eliminated the disease in 2000, but due to vaccine skepticism and vaccine rates going down, we've had a resurgence. Mr. Kennedy seems unfazed that our kids are getting sick. He fired the top nonpartisan public health officials at CDC because they wouldn't adhere to his agenda. I asked two of them in a Senate hearing back in September, what keeps them up at night when Mr. Kennedy is at the helm of Americans' public health? They both said the same thing: the next pandemic. In President Trump's first term, and at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, Operation Warp Speed helped bring vaccines to the public in record time. It was a remarkable success, and President Trump deserves credit for that. The National Institutes of Health estimates the Operation Warp Speed saved 140,000 lives by speeding up the development of the vaccines by 5 months. It's not if the next pandemic comes, but when. We will need a robust federal response and a thorough preparedness plan, one guided by actual science, and otherwise we endanger lives and the health of Americans. Reproductive health care, they're getting at that too. Back when I was governor, we made free and low-cost birth control accessible to every Coloradan. Low-cost, reversible contraception. We reduced unwanted pregnancies by nearly 60%. Those are pregnancies that were unwanted, but you're also looking in many cases of avoiding what would have been abortions. Now, this administration is doing everything they can to eliminate the last remaining protections. They're threatening access to mifepristone, a medication that's been proven safe and effective for decades, and especially in places where someone's had a miscarriage, allows them to deal with that at home safely. Colorado understands the importance of reproductive freedom. Women deserve the right to make their own reproductive health care decisions without politicians or government telling them what to do with their bodies. And all this comes at a time when some MAGA Republicans passed on their one big beautiful bill last summer. Some of us called it the Big Ugly Betrayal Act. The bill cut more than $1 trillion from Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, more than $1 trillion. And the results are going to be clear, and they are already becoming clear. Over time, 15 million Americans are likely to lose their health coverage. We have about 240,000 of them living in Colorado. Hundreds and hundreds of hospitals and nursing homes around the country are at risk of closure, many of them in Colorado. And since both sides, well, certainly Republicans have refused to work together to extend the ACA enhanced premium tax credits, 20 million more Americans have been hit with some of the largest price hikes in recent memory. That's for their health insurance. We've heard from Colorado families across the state that their monthly health care premiums have doubled, tripled, in some cases have quadrupled. In many cases, that's higher than their mortgage now. This is unsustainable and crushing for many Americans and many Coloradans. It means that working families are being forced to choose between putting food on the table and their health care, or even worse, dropping insurance altogether. Without a doubt, this is a crisis. It seems that the other side has realized that this will be devastating to their constituents, and hopefully we can find some compromises to resolve this. Last week, the House of Representatives passed a clean 3-year extension of the ACA enhanced premium tax credits in a bipartisan vote. Yet, yesterday, it got blocked here in the Senate. Soaring health care costs are squeezing working families in ways we couldn't have imagined a few years ago. We should be making it easier for Americans to get health care that's affordable, accessible, and universal, and not harder. It's worth remembering why we made all these cuts to health care in the first place, why they made all the cuts to research funding or child care grants, why they fired so many government employees. Because they wanted to pass a budget and find a way to pay for $4.5 trillion in tax breaks, most of which goes to the largest corporations and some of the wealthiest people in this country. To do this, they cut food stamps, they cut health care, to pass the largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich in the history of the country. And I think that speaks volumes of the values before us. We're not going to let some of these actions go down without a fight. And it's been clear from the beginning that President Trump's goal in his second term is shock and awe, to bombard American people with wall-to-wall coverage of every aspect, every decision that they make. They're trying to attack anything that is the status quo. I think he believes that this constant chaos will drown out all voices of opposition. Well, we're still here, we're still fighting, and we're not quitting. This past year, we've seen the administration send masked, armed agents without identification into communities to separate families and pull people off the street into unmarked vans. We've seen them target people strictly based on the color of their skin or the accent they may have when they speak. In the past week, the footage out of Minneapolis and Portland, Oregon, was truly horrifying. An ICE officer shot a woman, Renee Good, from Colorado Springs, apparently in cold blood. We're going to argue the legal aspects of this case, but she was shot, to the best of our knowledge, trying to have her voice heard that what was being done to her, to the community in this country, was wrong. Our office has been working tirelessly to try and help families who are desperately searching for loved ones who've been arrested by ICE. We've shown up repeatedly at the ICE detention facility in Aurora to press officials on concerns about the conditions of the facility, on the delays in communication, irregular process changes, the reports of ICE pressuring detainees, some of the minors, to voluntarily deport instead of proceeding through a judicial process. We're also working on legislation with Senator Cortez Masto to redirect the excessive increase in federal funding for ICE that was snuck into the big, beautiful bill to triple ICE's budget. We're working to redirect that money to actually keep our communities safe. When President Trump shut down the government last fall, he went after the most vulnerable in this country, but we were resilient in raising awareness for the healthcare crisis and fighting back against you have to call them the heartless snap cuts, the nutrition support for many of the neediest people in our communities. Both times, Republicans put forward a continuing resolution to keep business as usual, but we pushed back every way we could. Back in May, when Republicans were on an ill-fated mission to sell off public lands to the highest bidder to supposedly lower the public debt, we fought back hard and got them to abandon that plan. Some things just shouldn't be for sale, and one of them is our public lands. And even as they continue to try and sneak in different pieces of legislation, we've tried to stop them every time. But we know that President Trump and his MAGA allies aren't going to stop. That's why they've nominated Steve Pierce to lead the Bureau of Land Management. The BLM manages many of our federal lands and is a caretaker for some of our most breathtaking and sacred landscapes. Mr. Pierce, on the other hand, has proudly advocated to sell off these public lands. So I'll say once again, I've said it a bunch of times, Colorado's public lands are not for sale. They never will be for sale. So I'll certainly vote a no on Mr. Pierce, and we'll be fighting his nomination every step of the way. All of this brings us back to the final question: how did we get here? NCAR, disaster relief, the canceling clean energy projects, freezing child care funding, the demolition of the Arkansas Valley conduit, the relentless attacks on science. The president was elected, as I said earlier, because Americans thought he was going to make their lives better. 1 year later, families are still wondering when that relief is going to come. The cuts to NCAR, to clean energy, to clean drinking water, the cuts to child care and to financial assistance for Colorado families, all this is nothing to improve anyone's quality of life. It doesn't make groceries cheaper. It doesn't bring down the cost of rent or the utilities cost at the end of the month. To be frank, we've pretty much completely lost the narrative, the plot line of the administration. They seem to be more focused on building ballrooms and getting involved in wars without a necessary plan in place. You want to talk about how to get and create a forever war, that would be to depose a leader of a foreign country without a plan of what the transition is going to be. And they've been vetoing unanimous bipartisan legislation for rural water infrastructure projects that actually help working people. And that brings us back to NCAR. The work the National Center for Atmospheric Research does is critical. Senator Bennett talked about that at great length. I've talked about it. It informs so much of the weather data and scientific research that makes our country safer, both militarily and in terms of natural disasters. We can't let the dismantling of NCAR be just a blip in the news. Time and time again, the president makes critical announcements, but before he can even digest them, he's moved on to the next reckless action. This pattern leaves everyday Americans to pick up the pieces. The consequences permeate the fabric of our society. Dismantling science, cutting funding for the National Center for Atmospheric Research, harms every single American, diminishes the opportunities that we will be able to create for the next generation. It threatens our safety, it threatens our economy, it threatens our national security, it threatens our livelihoods. And we can't just stand by, because of one more crazy thing that comes out one way or the other. We need to all be determined to do everything we can to stand up to these attacks on science. And I think that starts with standing up for the National Center for Atmospheric Research. Senator Bennett and I have a simple demand. Put language into the appropriation bills that guarantees the full funding for NCAR through the end of this fiscal year. That was money that was appropriated to the National Science Foundation with the full expectation that that's where they would allocate it. And they did allocate it there. Once they've done that, the president shouldn't be able to come back in and tell them to, I don't know if deallocate is the right word, but rescind the money if you're going to use legal terminology. It should be abundantly clear that the work of the National Center for Atmospheric Research impacts every one of us. Again, it saves lives, it protects property, it boosts our economy, it creates the foundation by which our future economy is going to be based. We have heard countless stories from our constituents about how important it is. We've heard from family members of NCAR researchers who don't want the work of their loved ones to be thrown out, families who have struggled to support someone who got laid off at NCAR, students whose work relies on NCAR data, who may be in the process of finishing their PhD. We've heard from scientists who recognize this international crown jewel of research. We've heard from them all, and I brought just a few to read today. One constituent wrote, "My family has worked at NCAR for 20 years, and I am seriously concerned about its continued existence. I voted for President Trump in the latest election, but feel this attack on NCAR is more about a personal attack on Colorado for being a largely blue state than a legitimate action for the betterment of the American people. My dad has worked tirelessly for this place for decades, putting in long hours and taking on more responsibilities than he ever bargained for to keep up the work that he loves being a part of. Please fight for NCAR. Please fight with all you've got. It means so much to the people who've spent their life's work if you can keep it going." Another constituent, this one from Lafayette, Colorado, wrote, "NCAR is important for Colorado and the nation and provides not only top-notch science but employs close to 1,000 people in our community. My husband has worked for NCAR for over 16 years as a scientist and as an administrator. The loss of his job would be devastating to our family. We would not be able to help support our 2 college-age daughters. My husband carries our health insurance. I have stage 4 breast cancer, and having to find new health insurance that is affordable would be very difficult and quite possibly impossible. It would certainly threaten my current health status." Another constituent from Glenwood Springs wrote, "I have worked with NCAR scientists and educators for all of my career as a science teacher here in Colorado. I now live in Glenwood Springs, retired, but I think NCAR is one of the jewels of our state. I feel the same way about the National Renewable Energy Laboratory." And then last, I can't wrap it up more succinctly than this constituent. And I quote, "I am writing as a constituent and a scientist to ask you to stop the dismantling of the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, as announced by OMB Director Russ Vought. NCAR is the beating heart of climate research in the U.S. I grew up in Boulder, and I am one of the scientists who has worked at NCAR. My current research depends on NCAR. My future career opportunities in Colorado will be decimated if NCAR is dismantled. NCAR provides essential forecasting to support our nation in ways such as partnerships with airlines to provide in-flight turbulence and icing guidance, collaboration with reinsurance companies to assess risks of wildfires, heat waves, and hurricanes, forecasting capabilities that inform farmers, truckers, and other critical components of our economy about severe weather disruptions. Dismantling NCAR is a wasteful exercise that could cost lives. Please do everything you can to keep our communities safe, and don't let NCAR be dissolved. I would like to urge Congress to stand up and protect this critical scientific research, to stand up for American innovation, and to protect American families. I ask unanimous consent to call up and make pending Amendment number 4153 to H.R. 6938 to maintain operations and capabilities at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back the floor.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator Maine.
Mr. President, I appreciate the advocacy from the senators from Colorado for the National Center for Atmospheric Research in their state, and in the case of Senator Hickenlooper, his advocacy and support for scientific research in general. It's important for members to know that the bill before us includes robust funding for the National Science Foundation. This has not only been a top priority of mine, but of many members of the Appropriations Committee. Consistent with long-standing practice, the bill does not have a carve-out for NCAR, nor for any of the National Science Foundation's research facilities around the globe. And it does not direct grant-making to certain activities. This long-standing precedent is designed to preserve the National Science Foundation's autonomy in funding decision and empowers the agency to prioritize scientific needs. Mr. President, nothing in this bill precludes continued support for NCAR. Mr. President, this is a carefully negotiated package that passed the House of Representatives overwhelmingly in a bipartisan way last week. Any amendment would send the package back to the House where its fate would be uncertain. We would risk a continuing resolution, or even worse, another disastrous shutdown at the essential agencies funded in this package. Therefore, Mr. President, I must object, and I do object.
Objections heard.